Good evening, everybody. I want to welcome you tonight where we have a special treat for you. We have pastors on an open discussion tonight, and I have with me my good friends in the gospel, Superintendent J. Anthony Taylor from Chattanooga, Tennessee, and other than Bishop Linwood Dillard from Memphis, Tennessee. They're going to be sharing with us on several topics, and tonight we're going to focus on race relations in America. We will also be hitting several other topics as we go through these sessions, and I know that you will be blessed as you hear from these men as we talk frankly and openly about some of the things that are impacting our church and impacting our world. We want to start tonight with a discussion on race relations. And in talking about that, I think we need to speak frankly about a few things and openly as it relates to how our positions on how things lie as a state, right, how things lie right now. That means that sometimes we just need to say specifically and truthfully how we feel and how we believe. And I think as we speak truthfully, the Bible says the truth will make you free. If we get a little better understanding when we speak truthfully and honestly with people. I want to start tonight with these gentlemen. I want to talk about Black Lives Matter. And I want to talk about Black Lives Matter not only as an organization, but I want to talk more succinctly about Black Lives Matter as a chant or as a belief and kind of separate the two. But we want to talk about both and talk about the organization and also the impetus, the purpose of the organization, and how where your thoughts are about that. If we'll start with you, Superintendent Taylor, if you'll talk to us about what have been your thoughts on the Black Lives Matter organization and the movement, and how you feel that the type of impact that they're making on the world.
Well, thank you, Dr. Christian, for allowing me to share with you all. I'm honored to be on this panel with two of my dearest friends for almost 30 years. It's 30 years of friendship that's on this broadcast. And I want to thank you for this opportunity and thank God for Bishop Dillard for him as well, my good friend and brother. What the Black Lives Matter, I'm very sensitive when it comes to that. I've been somewhat of a, how can I say, I don't want to say devil's advocate, but I have a different view of Black Lives Matter. From what I've gathered information from social media and the actual organization and the history behind its coming together and this purpose behind it, I'm hearing a lot of conspiracy theories about the underlying cause and people that are involved in it, things of that nature. But as a blanket statement, Black Lives Matter, I believe in that statement. I truly believe that Black Lives Matter. And I know when people start saying all lives matter, we get into a different kind of a shaky ground there. But Black Lives Matter and the movement itself, and bringing awareness to the trials that Black people in this day and time have had to face, it's very prevalent. It's very needed. It's just like in the civil rights movement when they were saying Black Power. It's the same, I believe, the same correlation as Black Power, Black Lives Matter. But when we think about that, we talk about Black Lives Matter, and we start talking about Black people. Talking to Black people, I've gotten into a lot of trouble because I believe that when it comes to Black Lives Matter, before we can get anybody else to recognize and respect Black lives, we as a culture, we as a nation, we as a people, as African Americans, must first respect our Black lives. And that's a whole other discussion that I get into with people. I get into this discussion one time about Black on Black crime. Things of that nature. People are saying that we shouldn't use that term. There's not white on white crime and things of that nature. So I said, okay, scratch that. Let's use Black on Black respect, because I believe that's the one thing that we are really denying in our cultures is the respect for each other. And so when it comes to the Black Lives Matter movement and the purpose behind it, I think it's a good thing. I think it has started out good, but in some areas it's kind of branched out and morphed into something I don't think that it's really being advantageous to us as a people.
Well, I hear you on that. And you did something that I should have done. I'm sorry. I apologize for that. But in introducing these men, Superintendent Taylor and Bishop Dillard have been longtime friends of mine. The reasons I wanted to have this conversation with them is that they're my good friends. They're also fellow pastors. They're also have been elevated even beyond that in the church. We're all members of the Church of God in Christ, as well as a religious organization, and they are all fathers and they are all husbands. So I love and respect them so much and appreciate them for what they have accomplished. And Bishop Dillard, if you'll weigh in on Black Lives Matter.
Sure. Again, bless you, my brother. Appreciate you so much for having us. And Superintendent Taylor, as you all were just kind of talking, I started thinking back. Really, we met in our teens. We were teenagers, and maybe I remember I almost called you Larry. That's how close we are.
Yeah, yes.
I remember when you first started preaching, and we were all in UJAC and those years. And I don't know if we ever could have imagined having an opportunity to serve at this level. The same thing with, we call him Anthony, but Superintendent J. Anthony Taylor.
Anthony is fine, Doc.
But just a wonderful experience of fellowship we've enjoyed over the years. I appreciate you all for allowing me to be a part of this conversation. As you all started elucidating about Black Lives Matter, there were at least, I think, 3 contexts four perhaps, that you can look at this organizationally. There's an organization. It is a statement. It also is a principle. And the principle of Black Lives Matter actually should shape the movement. So that means in some ways, everyone that is a part of the movement may not be a part of the organization.
Right.
The organization itself has its own tenets and values, its faith, and as Superintendent Taylor said, there's some other suggested underlying, I guess you could say, rights and issues that they would want to approach or tackle. But I think for us overall, the Black Lives Matter statement should be based on the principle, has been mentioned, that we all do respect, we all do equal rights, and all of us in some way or another, if we don't march or subscribe to the organization, we should to the principle.
Right.
And that principle can mean so many things, as we're seeing more prevalent now with the issue of police reform, police brutality, but also you have some economic disparities, you have educational disparities, and even as we're seeing with this pandemic that we're in, relative to our health. And so I think that the movement based upon the principle is what's more important. I don't know if I'm interested in having debates and arguments about that organization, because they have their own set of value systems that they kind of govern themselves by. But I do think that a lot of people are blurring the lines. And so they assume immediately when we state or say Black Lives Matter that everyone is connected to the organization.
Right. And I think there is something that you mentioned there, Bishop, is that when Black Lives Matter, it's almost like everyone is expected to be a part of that organization. Either you are or you're against it, which is not. It's more complicated than that. During the Civil Rights era, there were several different organizations that were battling for the same, as you mentioned, principle or the same purpose, but they were titled many different things. You had SNCC, you had the Black Muslims, you had the followers of Dr. King. You had many separate organizations that were battling for similar interests. But because they weren't a part of one organization or another does not mean that they were not believing in the principle, which you said, which should underpin everything. That I believe in the principle, Black Lives Matter. It's difficult for me to see how somebody could disagree with the principle.
Absolutely.
The principle itself is pretty simple. I've read some things about the Black Lives Matter statement, and their what they believe, and I'm just frankly, I'm not on board with everything they believe. But the principle that Black Lives Matter, I think that should really be without controversy. That should be simplified. Now, having said that, we see people who respond to that, and Taylor was mentioning that with all lives matter as opposed to Black Lives Matter, it's almost as if it's a response to negate um, Black Lives Matter. And I've heard several people give examples about that. I heard a few examples. I'll give an example that one of my teacher friends gave. And I think it was on the 4th of July. They put up a meme with the American flag up, and on July 4th it said "All countries matter." So I thought that was a very short but simple example as to how African Americans may feel when you respond to that with "All lives matter," as if it seems to suggest that somebody is against not the organization, but that they are against the principle.
Mhm.
And I just wanted to get you guys feedback on that.
Sure, I think that to respond in saying all lives matter is diminishing or an attempt to diminish the experience of Blacks or African Americans in this nation. Uh, no other race can talk about the years of slavery, the years of the Jim Crow laws and discrimination, the racism that we even see today. All of us as Black men are immediately at a disadvantage just because we are Black. If we are seen by police officers when we walk in for job interviews, when we go into the normal places. So I think it is an insensitive statement. I think it is a statement that is ill or non-informed. And I've even heard some other ministers even try to address this issue as if we should just get over it. It is far beyond just getting over it. And so I think it is dishonorable to say all lives matter, even though we understand that. But the context of Black Lives Matter is speaking to the principle that we are yet in a fight, in a struggle for equality and justice. And it is so sad that in 2020, we are still having the same kinds of conversations, and we all are still having to watch our backs. Once we go out on the roadway, we get pulled over, we never know how it's going to end up on any given day.
Mhm. If I could add to what Bishop was saying, even with that, even when it comes to where we are in this day and time, I believe, just kind of throwing us out there, if the Native American, the indigenous people of America, if they were where we are, switch shoes, my question is, will we be saying all Native Americans matter or things of that nature? But they, as Bishop said, they have not endured what us as a culture, as a people have endured and yet are still enduring. Because even if you look at statistically, African Americans are being killed more by police officers than any other race in the country. And so that's why this Black Lives Matter movement has had such a force and such a push behind it. And now I believe it's getting the much needed attention. For example, the football player Colin Kaepernick. No one was, when he first came out with kneeling, we had people, white people, everybody was just dogging him out or things of that nature. But I saw a meme with him kneeling on his knee and that knee of the police officer on George Floyd's neck. And it opened up my eyes. I'm thinking, okay, I hope that they can see why Colin Kaepernick has been saying this all along. Mm-hmm. And I believe that helped that just that image alone has helped us to understand this is why Black Lives Matter. This is why we've been speaking up. This is why we, as to get spiritual and scriptural, we have to cry loud and spare not. Lift our voices like a trumpet and say, hey, listen, this has to stop, and we're pushing it forward. We're not going to take it anymore. We won't be silent anymore.
Right, and I think as an educator, one of the things that I ask about my kids, and sometimes we take things personal, and our defense systems immediately go up, and we become defensive. And I think that statement causes many people to do the same thing. They immediately become defensive because they're like, "What are you saying that I did wrong?" And instead of questioning the statement, you ought to be asking, "Why are you saying it?"
Mm-hmm.
If if a people in America have to say Black Lives Matter, then that means something has gone on beforehand that makes them think that somebody believes that it does not.
Right.
And in fairness to that, this is what the conversations that I have with many who've come to many of my white friends have come to me and asked me about this situation. And one of the things that I'll say to them is we're saying that because historically our lives did not matter. And Pastor Taylor brought up Colin Kaepernick and the flag kneeling during the national anthem. So I'll go to that next. One of the things that I said is that our lives did not matter when the Declaration of Independence was signed. It was not for African Americans. One of the most hypocritical statements that has ever been made in the history of our country is a document signed by a slave owner who said all men are created equal, while he had a female slave in a special room where he was what I mean, I would say that we call it a sex offense, where it was unequal authority. She didn't have the right to leave. There is DNA evidence. This isn't a guess. Thomas Jefferson had many children with Sally Heming, and that's documented DNA evidence and proof. But was that a relationship that she had an option to leave? Obviously not. So with that inequity of power, he would have been on a sexual offense he would have been documented as a sexual offender, had to register. But he wrote the statement, all men are created equal, while owning slaves. So obviously that did not refer to us. The Constitution, which was written a little bit later, did not have we were treated as property. We were not treated as men. And then later on in the compromise, I forget, I don't know if it was the compromise of 1850, but it was somewhere in one of those documents where they were trying to negotiate with each other. And they decided to count African American slaves as 3/5 of a person, only for the purpose of voting, to get more, to make sure that they were represented, to get more delegates in the South, and to get more delegates in slave states. But that did not give, of course, obviously African Americans the right to vote. So then after, you go through slavery, and then there's Jim Crow, and then, we still can't vote. We're kept from voting. We can't, I think it was Dred Scott versus Sanford. He didn't even have the right in the Supreme Court to sue a white person. He was considered less than a man, so he couldn't even bring suit. And so a lot of these things happened. And in the background of all of these things that I just mentioned, and that's why I'm setting this up for this next statement, the flag was flying. Flag was flying, and it was being created for the Declaration of Independence. Flag was flying for in the room when they're signing the Constitution. Flag was flying at the Supreme Court when Dred Scott was basically told he's not a person, he's not a man, he cannot bring suit. So what I have shared is that our relationship with the flag, even though that was not Colin's intent, may be a little different than someone else's. And I just want to get your thoughts on that. Generally, the thought of kneeling during the national anthem, and also how I would just say, like on Facebook, when they say relationship, one of the options says it's complicated. I just think for Black Americans, it's complicated. We don't hate the country, but there's a little conflict there based on how we historically have been treated. And Pastor Taylor, if you can speak to that.
Well, yeah, that's very, very, very powerful statement. Systemically, as you said, going back from 1776 even until now, since our country has been birthed and formed, it's ran through our blood. Bottom line, it's racism. The fact that Black people are considered less than is intrinsically embedded in them. I'm sorry, it's sad to say, but it's true. It's the truth. And so when you that symbol of that flag is, although yes, we love our country, yes, we honor the laws of this country, but as you said before, it's complicated. How can I respect somebody who how can I respect the country who disrespected my ancestors? Although I've never met my great grandfather, I never met my ancestors, but as a country, they disrespected them. And so now we, as people of God, who are conscious of what's going on, and people, just not people in general, who are conscious of what's going on in our country, we're speaking to that issue. It kind of reminds me even of the controversy of the Confederate flag. You know, how it's a symbol that symbolizes something of death, of slavery, of degradation, all of that. To me, it's the same thing with the American flag, but we kind of gloss over it. That's just my personal opinion.
Mhm.
And I'll just add to that, that even as you just kind of gave the narrative of the journey of our race, it is critical that we continue to resound that, rehash that, rehearse that, not in the sense of causing ourselves to fall into a place of pity, but we have to tell this story because many people that will say all lives matter, we should respect the flag, are looking at it from just a present perspective. But this has been the trajectory of our race since we've been brought over here to this nation. And I think that's one reason that we are seeing a lack of sharing of our history in our schools. And now we, even more so, I believe, in the church, and every Black parent all to ensure that their children are understanding our history, our background, our story, and we have to tell it. If they don't tell it, we have to tell it. We have to post about it. We have to speak about it, because again, they're only focusing in on what's happening now, and they are not understanding where we are when we want to do what everybody else do without having to look back over our shoulder or wonder if we're going to be disqualified, or wonder if we're going to be abused or hurt. So we can't identify with the flag like perhaps other races could.
Can I add to something that Bishop was talking? You know, it also reminds me of, and we're all pastors and preachers, reminds me of the story of the children of Israel. You know, they were told to, you know, even up until now, to this day and time, there's not a Jewish young boy or young girl who does not go to the synagogue, and they're told the story of the Passover. They're told the story of what happened thousands of years ago, and because the Lord told them, you know, write it on the frontlets of their eyes. Let them remember. You know, I can remind them of our history, and even over thousands of years ago, you know, 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. Now those same descendants are now learning of their history that's written. And as Bishop so said, that we have to, as a culture, remind our children, remind our people of who we are, where we come from. Not just from in Africa, but here in America, what we've done and accomplished here in America. And it goes back to, again, having a certain sense of pride and love for yourself. You know, I believe when it comes to African Americans, because we have been ingrained for so many years to think a certain way and mentality about ourselves, is that, you know, we don't really have a love and respect and honor for who we really are. You know, where we come from, kings and queens and scientists and mathematicians and things that is intrinsically in our DNA. And so we cannot deny it. But if you don't know that, you're going to continue to walk around here unlearned, ignorant, and not have appreciation or respect for who you are or for where you come from.
Sure. And if I could just add one more thing to that, and Dr. Taylor kind of touched on it, I believe that a part of this narrative is to try to desensitize us to the realities of our past, as well as that will cause us to devalue who we are, because we've come through a whole lot. We've accomplished a whole lot. And so if we become desensitized to it, when challenges hit us right now, we'll have people saying, as some of them are, oh, it's no big deal.
Right.
That just happened to this person. That just happened to that person. But we are fighting an ongoing fight. The fight is not over. We're just a part of this story now. That part is our time and our season to lift our voice and exert our energy to push for and speak toward equality and justice.
And I think you guys are falling right in line with where I want to go next, because you were talking about telling the story, and sometimes we in telling the story, I think there are some people and who believe that racism ended once the slaves were liberated. That is when racism ended. And as much as we smile at that, there are some people who truly believe that. And their response to whether racism exists is like, "You're free, aren't you? You know, slavery's over. You know that's it." And that's when racism ended. And I like to give a little context, and I want you guys to do the same when you respond. I mean, for people who think racism and segregation and all of that happened a long time ago, my father went to a segregated school all the way through eighth grade. He didn't go to an integrated school until he went to high school, and that's when they integrated what is now Shelbyville Central High School. So he was in I think they call it Bedford County Training School. He was in a segregated setting all the way through eighth grade. And that's my father, not my grandfather. So it's not, to let you give context, it wasn't that long ago. And also, as it relates to racism, to give understanding as to what we've experienced.
Hmm.
I had a very telling experience in fifth grade that is difficult for me to share, where it was apparent that my my willingness to stand up for my culture and say what I believed, even as it relates to racism. Even it started really with the president, and we're talking about presidents of Tennessee. And I think if you look at their record, particularly that of Andrew Jackson, it kind of speaks for itself. But it's like I was punished for that, and I was demeaned, and that was a very challenging experience for 11-year-old kid. I also would like to share. I also share in terms of my personal experience. I have been pulled over for driving while black, is what we call it. I think I was in college. I was in Franklin, Tennessee, and they pulled me over for going what they said was 37 miles per hour in a 35-mile-per-hour zone. Um, the police officers both got out. My car at the time was a small Tercel. It was easy to see in it. I'm sure they saw it was easy to see that I was African American before they stopped me. I didn't have any tinting on the windows. Two cops got out immediately. One had his gun drawn to my rear. The one who got out of the passenger side of the car. There was no reason to suspect I had drugs or anything on me. I wasn't driving impaired. And the first question he asked me, he said, "What are you doing here? And why are you here?" And his line of questioning continued along that line. "What are you doing here this time of night?" It was only like 6 p.m. But it was clear that I was being stopped for being black. After the incident was over, I told the officer, I said, "I'm going to court." And I said, "I'm going to contest this ticket, and we're going to talk about what you asked me." And sure enough, I went to court. I had the ticket with me, and he did not show up, and the ticket was dropped. But and that's just one incident. There's countless other incidents where we have concerns that, and when I go in this interview, are they not going to like me because I'm black, or will I not be given the same consideration because I'm African American? And we'll get into some other things that are related to that. But I just wanted you guys to kind of share your personal experience for those who think that really racism is over in America or in the world.
I hope and pray that each of you were touched and inspired by our service today. If you wish to partner with us, you can do so by Giveify. Download the app on Apple Store or Google Play and search for Bright Temple. If you wish to partner with us on Cash App, just look for Bright Temple in the to line. And in the for line, tell us the purpose of your gift. If you would rather mail your gift, you can mail us at Bright Temple, Post Office Box 453, Shelbyville, Tennessee 37162. Thanks in advance for your generosity, and we pray God's blessings on you and your gift.